Hello, everyone, and welcome to this CLE webinar on social engineering. I'm Justin Norcross, President of L Squared Insurance Agency, and we're proud to present this webinar with our partners at Alta Pro. Todd, please go ahead and take it away.
All righty. Well, thank you, Justin, and hello, everybody. I'm Todd Mapes. I'm the Vice President of Business Development here at Alta Pro, and we are truly honored to partner with L Squared on this webinar, in particular entitled "Social Engineering: There is Nothing Social About It." And to help us understand the threats and provide us tips for new school IT security, we are indeed very fortunate to have with us today KnowBe4's Erich Kron. Hello, Erich. If you're not familiar with KnowBe4, they are a highly recognized leader in the delivery of security awareness training. And Erich himself is a well-known expert and accomplished speaker in the areas of cybersecurity and the threats we all face from the phenomena known as social engineering. And believe me when I say there ain't nothing social about it. Believe me, and you're going to learn all about that from Erich. Hosting today's session is once again Alta Pro's own Risk Pro, Jay Reeves. Hello, Jay. Thank you. Glad to have you. So before I turn it over to Jay, and more importantly, so you can get the CLE credit for free, we need to go over the housekeeping on the webinar. So let me go over that real quick. Check your chat box regularly for important messages like the codes that will be sent during the webinar. The codes are critical because when you fill out the survey, you've got to input the codes that we're going to flash on the screen. That's going to validate and verify that you indeed have been listening or participating, which is prerequisite to get the CLE credit. We're going to give you 2 codes, so just remember that. Let's see, you enter the codes. Oh, by the way, if you're participating by phone, there's a PDF form at the end that you'll get to have to fill out so we can get you the CLE credit. So you can be joining by phone, or you might be sharing a screen with one of your colleagues. That's fine too. Just get the form, fill it out, and we'll take care of the rest from there. And we're going to do the Q&A portion. Please submit those during the course of the webinar via the chat, the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And we're going to budget the last 10 minutes of the webinar towards handling most of the questions that we get. Okay. And if we don't get to your question and you feel like you'd like to get an answer, send us a note on that, and we'll make sure we track it down for you. Okay, that's the blocking and tackling. I'm going to turn it over to Jay. Jay, take it away.
Thank you so much, Todd, and thanks so much to L Squared Agency for hosting this Lunch and Learn CLE. Greetings to everybody. We've got attendees from all over the country: Grand Rapids, Michigan, Clearwater, Florida, and right here in beautiful Chapel Hill, North Carolina. We call it Blue Heaven here in Chapel Hill. So glad to be here. L Squared knows lawyers. L Squared stands by lawyers, and they know that practicing law is hard work. The purpose of this CLE is to make it a little bit easier, or at least a little bit safer and less threatening for you. And if you're having fish for lunch today during your Lunch and Learn CLE, well, you're in the right place, because we're going to learn about a different sort of phishing threat from one of the top trainers in security awareness and cyber threats and cyber safety in the country, Erich Kron, as Todd said. So Erich, without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to you. So glad to have you here. And I guess the first question is not, are there threats out there, but how prepared are we for these threats? And you're going to help us through all of that.
Yep. And thank you for that wonderful introduction, Jay. Always appreciate that. What we're going to do today is, we're going to talk about what's going on out there. And, what I find is that when we get done with this, a lot of people go, hey, wait, maybe I'm not quite as prepared as I thought I might be. And so that's really what I'm here to open your eyes to. Now, again, this is for CLE credit, so it's not a sales pitch. I'm not going to be going on and on about our product. That's not what we're here for. We're here to help you understand what it is we're facing. So, my background, I've been in IT and security for, since the mid 1990s is when I got into it. And I've worked in manufacturing. I've worked in healthcare, which are two very heavily targeted industries. I've also worked with the DoD, where I spent about 10 years as the security manager at I ended up the security manager at the 2nd Regional Cyber Center Western Hemisphere, which was the U.S. Army organization that handled a lot of the network infrastructure for North America. So I've seen a lot of very interesting things in my time. Now, one thing that I found is, while I'm a very technical person, right? I'm a geek. I have little Raspberry Pi computers here. I got a rack server running in my garage. I love technology. But what I found is it's not always the cure for things. And unfortunately, a lot of security folks, we kind of get in that mindset because we're very, very comfortable around technology. And, it's one of those things that we really need to understand that there's more to it than that. So we're going to talk about that. Now, I work for KnowBe4. KnowBe4 is a security awareness training and simulated phishing platform. That's the whole idea there, is to educate users on all of the things that are human, whether it's falling for phishing, whether it's entering passwords in fake login portals. And we're going to talk about some of this. That's the stuff that we focus on. That's our pure focus. Now, when it comes to this kind of stuff, what we find, or what I find, is that a lot of people underestimate the adversaries out there. We think that the adversaries are not as complicated as they are. And I like to say, these are not the kids in their mom's basement drinking Mountain Dew, eating pizza. These are very, very organized and mature organizations. And frankly, they use the same types of marketing tricks that well-established organizations use. These folks with all these marketing departments, they do A/B campaigns, they do all this kind of stuff, right? But we're going to talk here about, first of all, a little bit about the current threat landscape. Okay, so we're going to see what that's looking like. We're going to talk about working from home and what's going on with that. What are some of the dangers, especially in the law community, with regards to working at home? Because there are some things you really need to think about that a lot of people go, oh, wow, I hadn't even considered that. So the last thing we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about defending against these attacks. So having said that, we're going to start off the agenda with the current threat landscape. Now, I think we have a poll to go in here real quick. All right, so the poll question is up. I'm looking forward to seeing how this turns out, right? Do you feel your organization is a target for cybercrime? And I think it's kind of interesting sometimes how this works out. I'm looking at the numbers running up here. And oh my goodness. Okay. All right. Okay. So looking at this poll right now, we're talking about, 100% answered right now. A couple of them are still trickling in, but, we have 45% of people think that they're just a little target. And I'm curious about this. Even 12% say they're not a target at all. And I think this is interesting because this is oftentimes a misnomer. And the reason why it's this way is honestly because people don't understand that all you need to do is have a website or an email address out there, and you are a target. These things are not like, they don't go out there and just start looking around. They grab big lists. They steal lists of contacts and connections. This is automated. And so it doesn't matter, honestly, how big you are. It also doesn't matter how much money you have, which is the other thing. Oh, I don't have anything anyone really wants. Well, especially in the ransomware world, it doesn't matter, because regardless of the size of organization you are, it doesn't really matter. You are needing the data that you have. Your information is what you need. So we can go ahead and pull that poll question down. But that's a beauty of ransomware, is ransomware actually, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because you need your information and your data to do your day-to-day work. And so it's valuable to you, even if you think it's not valuable to anyone else. So let's think about that, and hopefully let's reconsider whether or not we think we're a target, because I can tell you, I've seen small, like, neighborhood bakeries hit with ransomware and cybercrime and had to wire out money. I've seen this stuff happen all the time. And honestly, if you didn't know, law firms are definitely a target of cyber attacks. So according to the Bar Association in 2021, As of 2021, 25% of all law firms had experienced a data breach at some time. That is pretty significant. And that is of all law firms. Think about that. So 1 in 4, think about your friends, colleagues, partners, other people that you know in law. If you know 4 people, one of them has experienced some sort of a data breach at some point in time. That's a pretty significant number. Now, when it comes to ransomware, again, this is a great industry for targeting that. And it's become more of an industry as well as they've started stealing data. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But what happens is these ransomware attacks and other malware, as a matter of fact, generally spread first and foremost through email phishing. Believe it or not. Now, we hear that there's all these high-tech tools and things like this that hackers have. And it's true, they have incredibly high-tech tools once they get in the system. But what people don't understand is the way that they get in the first time is almost always an incredibly low-tech email phishing attack. It just is. It's frustrating for us as security professionals because, we do all this stuff and it comes down to something fairly simple. And that hasn't changed in a long time. Now, with respect to ransomware, the number 2 way that it happens is through RDP, or remote desktop protocol. If you log into a computer remotely, say from home back to the office, and it uses Microsoft's RDP, or remote desktop protocol, that's the kind of stuff that they've targeted very, very heavily. As a matter of fact, there's been some groups such as SamSam that were focused almost entirely on brute forcing RDP. In other words, just hitting away at it with fake passwords and stuff until they get in. And they were very, very successful. It turns out it was a couple of Iranian guys, but they were very, very good at what they were doing. So this is something that I see in a lot of law offices that becomes enabled so that people can reach back in and work on things remotely. And it's easy and it works well. It really does. The problem is most of the time when this stuff is deployed, it's not secured super well. We'll talk about what to do about that here. We also have to understand that RDP has completely spiked since the COVID-19. It's become available out there. And there's actually search engines. There's one called Shodan.io, which is one of the most common ones. It's a free search engine, just like Google, only you put in some parameters. And they are constantly scanning the internet and they will find these things. And it's a list. It's like a search engine for this type of thing. So they just automatically build a target list and they start going after them. And that's what I'm saying. This is where it doesn't matter how big you are. If you have any sort of an internet presence, you can be targeted with this stuff. So it's something to think about. Law firms, definitely a target of cyber attacks. And in 2020, Maze ransomware. Now, the Maze group has gone away, but what happens is these groups, they dissolve and then they pop up with a new name and they change things a little bit and they move around. So the players from Maze are still around, but in 2020, it was found that cyber attackers from Maze had hit no less than 5 law firms in the preceding 4 months, right? So they dumped a whole bunch of information out there, including sensitive information from a group that dealt with the Department of Veterans Affairs, the VA stuff, and litigation dealing with that. Now, I'm a vet myself, and unfortunately, as a vet, I've had a lot of my information dumped over different things. But if I'm in litigation and dealing with that with the VA, we don't want that information being dumped out there publicly. But this is personal medical diagnosis and other information related to veterans. But think about the information that you handle in your firms and your areas, and what those could end up being with respect to problems for people if they're dumped, right? What happens to the lawsuits when all of your information is dumped out there and client attorney privileges is gone? And once it's out there, what are you going to do? So now, according to Coveware, small to medium businesses, many of them providing professional services, specifically, they said legal or financial advice, stand out in the impact prevalence of ransomware compared to other industries. So like I said, doesn't matter how big you are. Unfortunately, you may not have realized this, but you are in an area that is heavily targeted for these kinds of attacks. So let's talk about what these attacks are, and let's talk about where they come from and kind of what happens here. Now, we have to understand Sun Tzu, he wrote this book, a little while ago. It's been out for a year or two. But in this book, he says all warfare is based on deception. Now, warfare may seem like a pretty strong topic or a pretty strong word to use in here, but I would have to argue with that. This is what we're at, whether it's financial warfare, whether it's with nation states, things like that. If you look at what's happened with the Ukraine and Russia right now, prior to Russia going into Ukraine, they hammered them with some malware. It's called a disk wiper. It pretends to be ransomware essentially, but just wipes the data on machines. Why? Because they're going to try to stir up problems with that side of things. Now, here's something to consider is here in the US, while we don't necessarily always think of ourselves as targets and what's the Russia-Ukraine thing got to do? Well, we're imposing sanctions on Russia, severe sanctions, which is hitting them financially. So this is one of those things that is going to come back, and we're expecting them to target us pretty significantly, only because we're doing these sanctions against them. So this is bigger than just kind of for fun. And remember, I said, not the kids in the mom's basement, serious players out here, including nation states. Now, if you look at some of the different groups out there, and a lot of these ransomware groups are nation state backed. For example, China has a number of them. North Korea has a number of them. And in those cases, a lot of them are after intellectual property. So if your firm happens to be working with an organization that has intellectual property that's being protected, that makes you a target for China and for North Korea specifically. Now, Russia is more about just wreaking havoc on things. They like to make some money. But when we look at China, they love to steal plans for things and create their own cheaper, and then turn around and sell them. So this is something that, we got to be careful with and understand the significance of it. Now, the way that most of this happens is through a trick called social engineering. That's really kind of what email phishing is, or those phone calls you get that are phishing, smishing. That's voice phishing or SMS phishing or text phishing, right? These are called social engineering. And social engineering is basically using our humanity, who we are, against us, if you will. So in this case, I love this. This is from a show called Mr. Robot. The lead character here, Elliot Alderson, he said, "I've never found it hard to hack most people. If you listen to them and watch them, their vulnerabilities are like a neon sign screwed into their heads." And this is true. Social engineers have tricks to figure out how you are susceptible to things, and they really understand psychology well. So you see a lot of people are familiar with social engineering in the aspect of tailgating or breaking into a building. So they figure out something, they come up to the door holding, an armful of coffee cups or something like that, acting like they're not going to spill them. Well, people feel obliged to help them by opening the door for them. That's social engineering. But it also works in the electronic world, even in the phone calls and the text messages, because it deals with us specifically in emotions. We're going to talk about how that affects us. So let's talk also about the pandemic, because it's not over with yet. We're still dealing with this. 2020 will be one of the most interesting years in modern time. There's lots of memes out there about kids having to deal with history from 2020 to 2022 and the stresses that's going to cause them in the future, right? Because so much has happened. But this was the first true global pandemic. It rocked our world. Organizations had to adapt in really short time, as did their employees. Their employees had to go home, and we got this information said, hey, you got to close up now. Everybody goes home. How do we continue to keep the doors open? So there was a lot of struggle with that. There was a lot of fighting with that. And I'm sure some of the people that are on this webinar experienced that. Well, as bad as that was, we were told, if you remember in the beginning, there was talk about, okay, well, if we flatten the curve, if we stay in for a few weeks, we can help with this thing. Unfortunately, we also found that didn't really work. And what's really hurting people now, whether we realize it or not, is the fact that it's persistent. It's still going on. I don't know if you've air traveled recently, but you're still wearing a mask from the time you walk into the airport to the time you walk out, unless you're sitting somewhere and having lunch or actively eating food. There's still these new variants that pop up. There's still this stuff that's going on all the time. So as difficult as it was in the beginning, we've really been worn down by the economic struggles. There was political turmoil in the middle of all this stuff, right? it's been a really challenging time. So persistence has worn us down over time. Well, why this is important is because these folks, these bad actors, they work on this kind of thing, and stress is their friend. Here, finances were a mess. Information about it was contradictory and sparse. We saw a lot of attacks that went out that said, hey, here's the latest information on COVID. We had organizations closing. People had to shift to work from home. Kids had to stay home during the day. I mean, how many people do you know that had their kids in daycare and school, and all of a sudden, not only are they at home, but they have toddlers running around wreaking havoc, right? In some ways, for us that do Zoom calls all the time or webinars, it was kind of nice because people started realizing, hey, you know what? Yeah, kids are a part of the equation, right? We got a little bit more tolerant of things like that. But even toilet paper and webcams were in short supply. I don't know if you ever tried to get a webcam in the beginning of all this, but it was a nightmare trying to get that stuff because everybody was trying to do it, right? And supply chains were down. So again, more stress, continued stress. And the scammers absolutely love this. Why? Because they use emotions and intense pressure and a sense of urgency to make people miss the signs that something's wrong. Now let's think about that. When you're in a heightened emotional state, how easy it is to make wise decisions. If you're upset, even if you're super happy about something, it affects our thought process and our ability to process things and make good decisions. And that's something that these attackers, again, these social engineers, they know this and they understand this and they use this against us. So they know that if we're afraid that, I don't know, we'll use a silly one here, but let's say we're afraid that our car's extended warranty is about to expire, right? We don't know anything about cars. We had expensive repairs in the past, and it makes us nervous that, oh my gosh, my car's warranty is about to expire. You know why they do those calls all the time? Because people fall for them. And that's the thing. When it comes to this, when we look at other people and we go, I don't understand how that person fell for that, it's because we're not in there. We're not in the emotional turmoil that happens. So for example, those ones that, you may get a phone call or a text message says, hey, this is the IRS. By the way, your social security number has been suspended, so on and so forth. Most of us just kind of go, oh yeah, right. Okay, whatever. But imagine if you're an elderly person and your entire income comes around to that fixed income that comes through Social Security. And all of a sudden you get a call that says, you're not getting paid this month. That can be an incredibly stressful thing for people. And they don't want that to happen. So they end up talking to these folks. They end up getting scammed by these folks because they're in that intense emotional situation that we can look at as we're detached and very easily kind of move away from it. But they have all of these different kinds of tricks. And the idea is that it will trigger one of our emotional spots when they just happen to get us at the right time. So think about that. Think about the emotions and the intense pressure that goes on. For those of you that are trial lawyers and such, if you've been out there arguing on the floor, when maybe things go a little bit wrong for you, how easy is it to keep your thoughts straight if you haven't practiced, especially in order to counter what's going on out there. Now, if you have practice with it, it makes it a whole lot easier, which is kind of why we try to train people and teach them to do it. But ultimately, you've seen people just totally lose it when things go a little bit sideways on them and the emotions get high. We know how this works. They know how this works as well. So back to the deception thing, something we got to understand is our brains are not perfect. So our brains have filters. And these filters interpret and present reality. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, honestly, the things we smell, taste, touch, all of those senses that we think are exactly what's going on actually go through some mental filters. And a lot of times it's not necessarily real. Now, before you think I'm crazy, let's talk about this. If you wear glasses, how often do you see your glasses in your frame of vision when you're not thinking about it? Odds are you never do. It's just there. Your brain filters out the area around your glasses and it kind of moves it all together and it just takes it out of your thought process. Same thing where if you just look around with your eyes, you look right, you look left, you don't see your nose until you think about your nose. Your brain does this filtering. So these are just some examples of what happens. I mean, we've seen video or we've seen pictures, the dresses. What was it? Blue and gold and white, or blue and black and white and gold, you know, which one is which. And people sitting at the same monitor, same lighting conditions, see different things. And even if you see them both the same side by side, where you can see what the other person is doing it by messing with the contrast and such, when you go back and you look at the picture again, you will almost always see the first one first, because your brain filters out all the other stuff. Now, there is an amazing series out there. It's called Brain Games. If you want to be wowed at the stuff that, you know, if you think I'm off my rocker here, I'm talking nonsense, watch this series and you will find out how much stuff that our brain just kind of shuts out on us that we don't know. It's an amazingly eye-opening series. Now, I talk about this because, again, what we're dealing with is deception. We're dealing with folks that are tricking people, running scams, getting people into this. This is social engineering. It's deceiving us into things. It's using us against us. Now, one of the tricks I'll tell you right now, I used in our organization back in the day was, while our organization used to have, they've been replaced, some of the not greatest fingerprint scanners. And I tend to do a lot of work in the garage, woodwork and things like that too. So my fingerprints are off and I got cuts on my fingers and stuff like that, or glue. So when I went to get into the doors, a lot of times I had to sit there and almost get to where I'm doing yoga poses, trying to get it to read my fingerprint. Well, I knew this. So our policy said, if you know a person, you can let them follow you in. You can open the door for them. Well, what I used to do is, when I would get into the elevator, I would step to the back of the elevator. That way, when we got to my floor, I was sure that somebody was in front of me. So they would do their fingerprint. We weren't breaking any policy. A lot of people know me because I'm such a public figure within the organization. And so then we would move in. Well, this was actually beneficial for both of us, because if I end up at the thing first, we're going to be there for a while. That is a social engineering technique, but not a malicious one. This is just kind of how things work, if that makes sense. Now, if you think you're immune to social engineering, I have something here that's going to be a little bit fun, I think. It's a magic trick, actually. And so here we go. I want you to pick a card, any card. I don't care which card it is. I want you to pick your card. Make sure you have your card picked, and we're going to make that card disappear. Now, through the magic of a PowerPoint transition, I'm betting your card is gone now, right? And everybody on this webinar should be nodding right now. So how did I do that? How did I make your card disappear? Well, we started off with this, and we ended up with this group of cards. Now that you look at them, what do you see? They're totally different sets of cards. But by rushing you and making you focus on your card, the card you're going to have disappear, you're not looking at the details of the stuff around there. It's kind of a focus redirection technique. And so by doing that, and replacing it with similar cards and similar pattern, you don't notice. Now, if the second set of cards was 2 through 10, you'd see it easily. Now, the other important thing about this, and one of the reasons I use this example is because now that you've seen this trick, if you see something like it in the future, you're going to go, you know what? I remember that this was a trick. You may not remember exactly how it was done, but you're like, you know, I recognize that this wasn't anything complicated. It was just kind of a trick. Well, that's exactly what we want people to do when they're looking at like phishing emails, when they come in. They may not know all the mechanics behind it, but they go, you know what? I remember seeing something like this and it was a trick. So I'm going to report this and see if this is really legitimate. And we want them to do that. We want them to report it to somebody within the organization or take another action on it. But that's what happens is once we become familiar with how things work, it's much easier for us to spot it. Now, the next thing we're going to talk, yeah.
Eric, let me jump in here. First of all, I would encourage all attendees never play cards with this man. Second, you're the digital guru. I'm more of an analog. I'm the old timer analog. And your point about not knowing what's not there with your card trick, I found back in my practice, I represented lawyers who were in trouble with the state bar or had malpractice claims. And what I found was law offices that were well organized, lawyers knew what was there. Those were safe lawyers. Lawyers offices that were disorganized, and this would apply to physical files as well as digital files. The lawyers often didn't know what wasn't there. You wouldn't know what wasn't there. Was that certificate of service placed in the file? Was the verification actually placed in the file? You don't know if it's not there. That's sort of to the point of your trick. The second thing I would point out is we all know social engineering, whether we call it that or not. Just this morning, I logged on and I was delighted to get an email from my bank saying my loan has been approved. Well, I hadn't applied for a loan, so I was a little confused there. Luckily, I'd had my morning coffee, so I realized I had not applied for a loan. And when I looked at the sender's email address, it was a little wonky. It was my bank, but it had some of the letters weren't in the right place. So they were obviously fishing for me. Luckily, I didn't take the bait. And my final point, you started with the American Bar Association survey result that 25%, I think it was, of law firms have experienced a data breach. That's probably underreported. I'm familiar with that survey, and we're going to do an entire webinar unpacking the ABA legal tech survey. And a lot of law firms, this sort of is back to your card trick, some law firms may not even know they've had a data breach. Maybe the data hasn't been exploited or used yet, but it's been compromised. Almost as if someone has peeked in their files. Maybe nothing has happened, but it's been compromised. So, and the final thing, and then I will shut up and pass it back to you. I love the quote from Sun Tzu. There's another quote, and I think it's something like, the supreme art of war is to subdue your enemy without even fighting, which is where you come in. Preparation, prevention, risk management. That's how you win the war.
Yeah, and to your point about not knowing that data is gone, a lot of times this stuff is stolen, especially with intellectual property, or let's say somebody's trying to wreak havoc on a merger and acquisition. Like M&As are targets for this kind of thing. We've seen that happen quite a bit. They'll get into the system, they'll look around and they'll go, oh, okay, cool. Well, I found some information. Now I know that there's going to be a merger or acquisition of this company, and they trade on insider information. This stuff may never come out in the public, but on the dark web, it's available for purchase. It's available in the groups that share this kind of information. So I actually did an interview with a large media source yesterday about M&A attacks when it comes to this, and what's happened with that, and what it's done in respect to scuttling some M&As or changing some merger and acquisition type things. SB Tech and gosh, I can never remember the name of the other one. It's one of the online betting things. They were doing a merger, and they ended up having to set aside a $30 million fund because SB Tech got hit with ransomware while they were doing the merger. The info came out on their S1 filing, but they ended up having to set aside, it was DraftKings and SB Tech. They had to set aside $30 million for restitution and costs related to that during the merger. And it could have really impacted the merger in a major way. So, those are all very good points, Jay. Now, I think we have another poll that we can talk about here as far as working from home, because we do want to talk about that now. So I'm curious, with organizations, what are you doing at this point? Are you working remotely? Are you still, everything's changing right now. And it's kind of interesting seeing in some of the different areas, like in our organization, for example, we have the option of working from home or coming back in. And there's obviously pros and cons to everything. But we have hybrid available as well, which is kind of an interesting option as well. So we have some people that are back, some people that are not, but in some places, they've just decided they're not going to do this anymore. And looking at this response, I'm actually really surprised. This is fairly evenly spread between everyone back. Some are still working remotely, and everyone's working remotely. This is a pretty even spread, and I honestly haven't seen it like this yet. So very interesting information here. I think that's pretty fascinating. Jay, what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's interesting too, Eric, and I know that the profession is sort of grappling with how do we do it from here on out? Because
Yeah.
once the genie is out of the bottle and people are working from home or working from Starbucks or wherever, it's kind of hard to get them back on the farm, right?
Yeah.
In for some firms, so it's a real issue that
Yeah.
that every law firm that has employees and more than one lawyer that they're grappling with.
Yeah.
And what do clients want? That's important too. Do clients want a brick and mortar office? Do clients want to meet with you in a suite in your office, or do they prefer maybe a Zoom
Yeah.
initial consultation? And in fact, the ABA Tech survey shows us that clients prefer online contacts. They don't dig getting in a car, driving 45 minutes, parking, walking up the stairs, talking to a lawyer for 20 minutes, and then doing it back and going home.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out, because I would say it's in transition now. It's still, firms are grappling with how to deal with this.
Well, for those 2/3 of people that either have a hybrid environment or they have people working from home, or you're working from home yourself, there are some things we got to think about. And one of those things is smart devices and privacy. So there are a lot of things in your home that you may not even realize that we as security professionals say, nope, not going to happen in the corporate office, right? Like Alexa here, who I happen to have muted so they're not listening, right? I don't use it all the time. But there are over 90.7 million smart speakers in American homes estimated at the end of 2021. That is a lot of smart speakers. And if you see any time around Christmas, there's the big push. The Black Friday stuff is like, 25 cents for these things. I mean, it's ridiculous what they sell them for, but they're getting in there. And what's a problem with this is they're constantly listening for keywords and commands. And even as part of that, they are oftentimes recording, and then humans are reviewing it to see if it missed something. So this is all part of what's okay when you do this, what you agree to. So when you're talking about sensitive topics, be aware of devices that are potentially listening. That's a scary thing, because, even on our phones, Siri and things like that, they're constantly listening for what's going on. So think about stuff like that. Try to mute those things whenever you're talking about sensitive information. Imagine if an attacker is able to get in there and exploit one of these at some point in time. They have a microphone in your office. That's a problem, an internet connected microphone, right? Now, smart cameras are another one. When you have smart cameras in your home, there's a lot of them that are very inexpensive to put up. And I use a couple of them here, but I take some special precautions. So like Wise cameras, there's a Yi camera. You can get these things for dirt cheap. They plug into your house. It's great. You're away, you're on a vacation, you're on a trip for the weekend or whatever. You can look into the home and see that the dog's doing okay and all that. But where are they pointing? Do they also have microphones? And if you can access them when you're away from your home, that generally means that that video and audio stream is being put up on a server somewhere else. Now, scary part, a lot of these are Chinese devices. Think about that, remember? And a lot of times the Chinese government will have access to certain things. And I'm not trying to tinfoil a hat here, but it's a scary proposition. Now, many smart cameras stream a video feed like that you do that. And so think about that. What are they facing? What are these cameras looking at when it comes to sensitive information? Can they see your monitors? Things like that. Also, Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi doesn't have the same protections as the corporate networks. This Wi-Fi pineapple, the whole thing is it's designed to pop in and fake a access point that you're used to connecting to. It gets in the middle, and now it can steal all your device, all of your information, or a lot of your information if you're not careful, for a $99 device. These are especially ugly in high density areas, like in apartment buildings and high density areas, or if you do a lot of work from even like a coffee shop. This kind of stuff, I can fit one of these and a battery pack that'll run it most of the day inside a venti coffee cup from Starbucks. So these things are out there. We have to be careful with this stuff too. Now, the other thing that we got going on is business email compromise. This is the type of phishing that doesn't have a link. It's wire transfer fraud. It's stealing W-2 information. It's doing stuff like that. And this is a very, very lucrative business for these attackers. And for example, some BC lawyers, they got hit by for $2 million. They were social engineered out of. This is real estate and investment funds. We see stuff like this all the time, where sometimes they'll get into like an email account and they'll say, hey, we need you to actually send the money to another account instead. Lots of money goes wrong this way. Supply chain and invoices. Now, again, this is where somebody will get into an email account often. They'll trick somebody into that. And what will happen is they end up sending invoices and continuing conversations with customers or vendors through an actual email account that's been compromised. And sometimes they'll change where somebody sends billing. They'll change where somebody is sending the funding for these invoices. So we have to be really, really careful about that. That's another way they're attacking. And then even on other topics is where social media is getting into things. And this is a social engineering ploy. It was interesting with the George Floyd issues. About half or more than half of the social media posts were from fake accounts. And then when coronavirus was out, it was doing the same sort of thing. Nearly half of accounts were tweeting about coronavirus. They found that they're likely bots, and they would have tweets from the same account throwing around the opposing information to each other within hours of each other. And this was really designed to create divisiveness and more stress and divide us. And it worked very, very well. If you saw a lot of the stuff that was going on there, regardless of your political side, they were targeting both sides to get them riled up, to get them emotional. Now, ransoms and ransomware rising from 2018 to 2019, average ransom demand rose from 6,000 to 84,000, and the attacks were up by 40%. Now, that was the demand, and you can negotiate down a lot of times depending on the group you're dealing with, but the demand went from $6,000 to $84,000. That's pretty significant, and the attacks were up 40%. Unit 42 looked at 2021 and said the average ransom payment, not demand, but the actual payment was $570,000. We're talking about real money there. And Sophos, one of the security vendors out there, deduced that the total cost of a ransomware attack more than doubles if you pay the ransom. Why? Because you have to get in and you have to figure out how they got in. You have to have somebody come in and do this forensics work. If you don't, you're open to having issues again also. Now, we saw this happen a couple of times. There was an organization in the UK that paid a 2.4 million pound ransom and got all their stuff back, got it up and running. And a month later, the same ransomware group hit them again for another 2.4 million pounds. Why? Because they didn't get them out of the system. They still had back doors in. And what's changed in ransomware is it used to be fully automated. You would click on something, it would launch, and everything would go crazy. Now it's not automated anymore. Now they actually get in and they look around and they look for the important information. They steal a copy of it before, and then they go after the big stuff really fast. So it really cripples organizations. And then they also say, if you don't pay the ransom, we're going to dump this stuff publicly. So they've pulled a lot of leverage. I've seen ransoms as high as $42 and $50 million out there for some significant ones. There was a law firm up in New York that was handling some of the folks in the Hollywood area, and they got hit. They had like a terabyte of data stolen out of their network and nobody saw it. Their ransom demand was $42 million. So you can see there's some pretty significant stuff going on with this. Now,
Eric, let me jump in real quick on the email compromise. In fact, I first heard of you. I was reading a USA Today article a couple of years ago, and you were quoted as an expert. One of the stars hosts, I think, of Shark Tank, was hit with an email compromise, and you were quoted in that. But bringing it back to lawyers who deal with email instructions for wire transfers, transferring money, that's a particularly vulnerable area. Here in North Carolina, our state bar has handed down a rule that says lawyers, particularly real estate lawyers, but any lawyer handling transfers of funds, have a heightened duty of diligence. unsure exactly what the heightened duty of diligence is. Before you send that money, you have a heightened duty of diligence. That may be just as simple as picking up the phone and calling the sender who tells you, oh, send the money here, calling your client or calling the lender and find out, oh, did you just email me? Am I supposed to send it here? So it may be as simple as making a phone call. But wire transfer, transferring money is an area of particular vulnerability for lawyers. And we got one chat that says, a commenter in the chat said that anytime you get an email that uses the word kindly, Kindly, don't click on it. That's a phishing email. So there are, anyway. So,
well, and that's true though, Jay, if you're working with US based clients. But if you're working with international clients, that's a word that they use fairly often in normal conversation. So knowing who your clients are and where they're from, because I talk to people all the time in India and over there, and they use that phrase. That's a phrase that's normal to there. So with those people, you can't just say, oh, it says kindly, it's a fish. However, if you're strictly working with US people, the chances are much, much better. Now, I think we have another poll here real quick for this before we get into defending the attacks, which we are going to move through pretty quickly here. While this is up, Jay, you're right about, the wire transfer fraud thing with lawyers, with law, and with like real estate. If you deal with real estate transactions, title companies and mortgage companies and things, those are dealing with large deposits or, earnest accounts and things. Those are forever getting attacked by this. There was a couple here in Florida that got, they ended up losing $70,000 of their own down payment on a home because they got an email supposedly from, I believe there was a title company saying, okay, we needed to transfer the down payment now. And by the way, you're going to use this account instead. Now, a lot of them, what they're doing is in the beginning, they're saying, this is the only account we will use for wire transfers. Anything you do, or if you send it anywhere else, it's all on you. They're writing that into the contracts now, which makes sense, but we need to make sure that people understand that because it happens far too often. So do you feel like you're prepared for a cyber attack? Well, okay, about 19% say that they are, about 19% say that they're very prepared. 54% say somewhat prepared, and 27% say they're unprepared. Okay. For that 27% out there, please, please, please. Now, I understand you're probably on this webinar to help with that, but understand how vulnerable you are with this. If you're somewhat prepared, time to do a review and see where your big threats are and what you can do about that. And so let's talk about this now here real quick. Let's talk about defending against it. Again, the number one way that this is happening or getting started is phishing. It just is. I work for KnowBe4 because I realize that this happened. I don't advocate against phishing because I work for KnowBe4. It's the other way around. I work for them because I'm so passionate about it. And I've seen it throughout my long career in cyber. But when we train people, sometimes we do it wrong. We got to understand that awareness and behavior are not the same thing. Just because I make you aware of something doesn't mean you care. And so the traditional efforts in awareness and teaching people about this kind of security is based on the hope or belief that information leads to action, but it doesn't. If I tell you that there's a blue car in the parking lot, you go, okay, who cares? If I tell you there's a blue car in the parking lot and your name is spray painted on it, all of a sudden it's relevant to you and you care. Now, when we train people too, the focus that we need to have is we don't want to get deeply technical, but we want to get them to have reflexive behaviors, correct reflexive behaviors. So in the great words of the great orator, Mike Tyson, I love this. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Well, when you're in that heightened emotional state, you are relying on the things that are kind of the lizard brain or, your default actions. It's why in the military, they teach you to do certain things over and over and over again until it becomes muscle memory. That way, if something happens, like I was in the Navy, I was on ships, if something happens and pipes burst, I'm not sitting there thinking about it and looking up in a manual how to do it. I've practiced it. It's second nature. I'm grabbing stuff and I'm trying to stop that leak, right? This is the same kind of thing we need to do with cyber attacks, only not quite to that extreme. But when they recognize something, you go, you know what? Wait a minute. This isn't right. Boom. You send it off to have somebody look at it, or they sit back and they look for those tells. They hover the links. They look at the reply to address. all of those things that we want them to do, that needs to be their base reflexive behavior, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. But it's very important to understand, just because we tell something to somebody, it doesn't matter. Now, social engineers, they're going to use things like greed, curiosity, self-interest, urgency, fear, and helpfulness. What I like to tell people is, if you get a strong emotional reaction to a text message, phone call, or an email, take a deep breath, step back, and look at it closely. If it scares you, if it makes you happy, if you won a new car, right, and you're not even in Oprah's show, you are liable to be excited about things, but it's very easy to make these mistakes. So if you have that strong emotional reaction, take a deep breath and look at it. Now, greed, curiosity, all this stuff is in pretty much everything. It's almost always urgency too. That's a big key of it. Now, what I would like to show, and I can get this to you if you want to reach out to me. This is a PDF that we have that you can just keep in a cubicle. We keep it around the office for those that work in the office too. But this is when you're in that emotional state and you're like, what am I supposed to look for? This is a little cheat sheet. It's a free PDF that we can get you. And basically it tells you the things to look for. So you have a little cheat sheet. You go, okay, you know what? That's right. I need to hover the link. I need to check it out. This is such a great little resource. I love it. And so I would be happy to share this with you if you let me know afterwards. It's a great little PDF. So having said that, let's move on to any questions we may have. Jay, do we have any out there? I think I see some things in the Q&A.
We do have some good questions, Eric. And before we get to the questions, I know Before also publishes frequent phishing email subject lines. And here are a few of the most frequent ones. Password check required, staff review coming up. And here's my favorite, new food trucks are coming to this area. So those are all phishing email. Okay, some of the questions we got. Eric, what exactly do you mean by a data breach?
Okay, so a data breach is essentially going to be the loss of data. It's going to be data being stolen generally, okay, or accessed. It can even be just accessed without having permission. So if somebody gets into a system and they rifle through your files, they may not have to take it out of your system, but they've accessed it, they've looked at it, they've gleaned the information. That is a data breach. This is anywhere where someone unauthorized is able to get into your system and look at information they're not authorized to view. That's considered a breach.
Gotcha. Another question, the dark web. Can you explain more about what it is? Should I be concerned about it, how it works?
So the dark web is really, it's a sketchy place for sketchy things for the most part. Okay. A lot of times you have to have a special web browser called Tor. It's called the Onion Router Network. And what happens is it was originally designed for whistleblowers, for government whistleblowers to be able to make these whistleblower claims with anonymity. I believe it was a DARPA project actually in the beginning. Well, it's turned into all these other things. And now what they've done is they have marketplaces out there. They have websites out there. If you are hit with ransomware, they are liable to be dumping your data out there as a proof of concept. So they're going to say, if you don't pay us the ransom, you're going to end up, we're going to dump all this stuff on the internet. And by the way, here's a sample of some of the things we've seen. And they will generally post that on the dark web. Now, it's the internet, but it's generally the internet that you can't really get to by accident. Okay. But understand there's marketplaces out there where they sell services. Like they'll actually review phishing emails for grammar and spelling errors and guarantee increased revenues off that. You can buy any kind of illicit drug you ever wanted. You can buy fake passport stuff. You can buy fake driver's license blanks. You can buy anything you want out there at these things. And it's highly evolved and mature the way it's all set up. So honestly, I would recommend, if you're curious about it, don't just grab a browser and go out there working around, because you can find yourself in some really bad places very, very quickly. But it's one of those places that as a security professional, we need to know about so we can track trends and things like that. If you do get hit with ransomware though, expect that you will probably be sent to a website that ends in, instead of .com or .org, it'll end in .onion. And that means you have to have the special browser to get there.
Thank you, Eric. I think we got maybe 2 more questions before we wrap up. Here's one. What do you know about Chrome Remote Desktop? Any vulnerabilities?
Not specifically to the Chrome Remote Desktop. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not always a huge fan of all the remote desktop things that are going on out there. Now, one of the key things that you want to remember, if you're doing remote work, however you're doing it, I always prefer, like I know I talked about RDP earlier. What I recommend is if you're going to use RDP, set up a VPN first. VPNs are incredibly inexpensive to be able to log into the network through a VPN, because VPNs are designed by default to be secure, where RDP is not. So those vulnerabilities are not addressed by default. The Chrome desktop one, again, it's just another, there's so many different ways to remote access. Now, I haven't heard of a whole lot of attacks specifically going after that, but that doesn't mean that they don't happen and that it's not a risk.
And one question here, it seems the wire transfer fraud struck a nerve. We got quite a few comments on how different state bars are approaching this issue. And here's sort of a related question. I started receiving many fake invoices and orders to an old email address that's now forwarded to our new address. Question, do I need to be worried that they've infiltrated my account, or just assume that they have the email from the list?
My guess is more than likely, unless you're seeing parts of conversations you've originally had. In other words, if they just send you something and say, here's an invoice for something, send us money, that just tells me that you're kind of on a list somewhere. You've become a target. But if you get an email that came from an earlier conversation with somebody saying, hey, I need you to wire some money to this, or they start opening that up again through another account, that means probably that other account has been compromised, and they're using the contact list and they're going back and using previous conversations, because that adds authenticity. So they'll use previous conversations to start new conversations, because you go, oh, I've dealt with this person before. And next thing you know, you're trusting them a lot more. So if you're seeing those, if you're seeing ones that are including previous conversations, that's where I would be a little bit more concerned about the other email address. Otherwise, you probably just got picked up on a list somewhere, and now you're part of the automated phishing process. Lucky you.
Unlucky you.
Right.
One final comment I'll throw out there, because it was just so coincidental. Just last week here in North Carolina, lawyers got emails from the State Bar Association regarding their CLE credits for the year. Well, the reporting deadline was last month, and lawyers started getting these in their inboxes. Whoa, what's going on with my credit? Well, it was a phishing email. There is no State Bar Association in North Carolina. There's a NC State Bar and there's a NC Bar Association. But that created a bit of a stir in our profession. So we're at the end of our time here. Eric, some concluding thoughts?
Just honestly, be very careful out there. Again, if you take nothing from this, understand that if you have a strong emotional response to that email, text message, or phone call, take a deep breath and look at it really critically. Look at it like a silent toddler running around your house. You just don't know what's going on, but you want to be very suspicious.
Thank you so much to our attendees. Thanks for showing up. Take care of yourself, take care of each other, take care of your clients, and we'll see you at the next Lunch and Learn webinar. Todd?
All righty, before you guys run off, I need you to stay focused for another minute or two. First, again, a reminder to complete the survey. You can get access to it. I think it'll come across in the chat section, as well as you can access it at the altaprorpg.com website. It'll open automatically in the browser after the event also, by the way. So that's probably the easiest way to do it. You also need to input the codes, which in this case are free and CLE. So let me repeat that. These are secret words, free and CLE. So you need to, make sure you put those in. And before I let everybody kind of scoot away here, I just want to say a couple of things. One, Eric, I can attest to the show Brain Games, and if you guys haven't seen it, check it out. It'll open your eyes to a lot of things.
Yeah.
The second thing I want to say is I hope everybody found the session as beneficial as I did, and I'm not even getting CLE. I'm not a lawyer, but it was great information. And I want to extend a big thank you to both L Squared and in particular Justin Norcross for sponsoring and delivering this great session, and again delivering free CLE to you guys. And along with a big thank you to Eric and Jay Reeves for their time and great information. And then finally, I want to say thanks to all the attendees. And again, hope you found it to be as worthwhile and as valuable as I did. And then in closing, I want to say, keep an eye out from Justin and the folks at L Squared. We got another webinar coming up here in a couple of weeks. So you'll be able to knock out 2 hours of CLE in the first quarter of the year. And this one's going to be about cannabis law. So hope to see you there. All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off, and we wish you guys, everybody here, to have a great rest of the day and great rest of the week. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Justin. Sayonara.